Hello, everyone. Welcome to Big League Dreaming, the podcast, a show about baseball, dreams, and family. We're right in the middle of the College World Series. The two teams are finally set, and we have all of the members of the podcast. If this is your first time joining us, this show is a dad, that's me, John, and his three sons talking about the game of baseball. Let's introduce each son, and then we'll get to our World Series breakdown for the College World Series of 2024, and then we'll give some of our thoughts and predictions. Let's start with son number one. He's based in Charlotte, North Carolina. Zay Gonzalez. Zach, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. A little under the weather, but yeah, excited for a College World Series.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait to talk to you about some of your thoughts on how the games have gone this far. Now that we're down to two teams, son number two is Ty Gonzalez. He's based in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Ty, how you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. I'm excited to kind of wrap up our College World Series season we've been doing kind of the last month. Excited to talk about some college baseball. Bummed my Florida Gators didn't make it in, and also bummed my prediction of last week's episode. Florida State just missed making it into the finals against Tennessee. But excited to make a final prediction.
That's yeah, we'll talk about how your team's fared. Son number three is Zane Gonzalez. He is based in South Bend, Indiana. He's the one of the four of us that's still coaching. Zane, how you doing today?
Doing well, with the craziness of summer and bouncing all over the place. But like Ty said, the College World Series is coming to an end, so it's going to be an exciting matchup for the final series.
Exciting matchup indeed. I think Tennessee still seems to be the favorite. They're the number one seed over Texas A&M. Zach, can you give us a breakdown of what we look forward to this weekend? If people are listening to the podcast, on a Saturday morning or over the weekend, what's the format here?
Yeah, so it's a three-game series. They'll play Saturday, Sunday, and then if necessary, game on Monday. Um, like you said, Tennessee's the number one overall team. They've just been dominant the whole entire year. They only lost one series the entire season. They have 58 wins right now. If they win the College World Series, that would give them 60 wins, which would make them, considered one of the, you could say that they're one of the best college baseball teams of all time. I think 60 wins, that hasn't been done since the 90s, Wichita State, when they had over 60 wins. But since then, it might have even been earlier than that. I know it was Wichita State, but they play a lot less games nowadays than they did back then. There wasn't a limit or anything like that. So Tennessee, definitely the big favorite. Big offensive team. Texas A&M, they're known for their pitching. So I thought the big park in Omaha would slow down Tennessee a little bit, but they're still scoring 8 runs a game. That's not really the case. And they have a lot of experience. A lot of those guys have been to Omaha two, three times. So the Tennessee coach was kind of joking that the number one seed doesn't ever win the College World Series. So they're the underdog is how their mindset is going into this weekend.
They are well, that's a good mindset to have. Although I will say this, we did our predictions with kind of a wheel generated predictions that Ty put together. Ty, on your scorebook card over there, what two teams? Who had the two teams that are in the finals?
So the two teams in the finals, Texas A&M, you had Texas A&M, and
Yes.
then Tennessee, when we did our first wheel spin when we started this a few weeks ago, I was pushing. I wanted Tennessee really bad, and then Zayn on one of his spins said, "I want Tennessee just so Ty can't have them." And sure enough, right after he said that, he landed on Tennessee. So in our bracket for the podcast, it's Zayn versus Dad, Tennessee and Texas A&M.
Yep. And the,
Now,
the dogs, Benny and Griffey, got Tennessee as well, so they're still going strong.
That's right, the dog team, the dog and all the listeners. That's right, have Tennessee. So
to explain that to all the listeners out there, Zach has a dog named Griffey. I mean, these are baseball dogs, right? And Zane's got Benny and another baseball name, for Benny the Jet Rodriguez. And we did this wheel spin for them so they could have a team. The dogs combined. We don't want any fighting between the dogs. We know who would win that fight. Um, But Zane, you joke. We were joking about it in a way, but really, it's probably like Zach was saying, no surprise that Tennessee's been so dominant.
No, I mean Tennessee's had, like Zach said, such a great consistent year, and we kind of talked about in the last one how much they rely on their offense, and their offense has done a really good job, but I think their pitching has kind of picked up for them as well in these last two games going into the final series. I think I said in the last episode that it was going to be a big test for them against Florida State, two high-powered offenses, and that's what we got in that first game. I think it was like 12-10 or 12-11 or something like that in that first game. It was kind of just going to be who outswung the other, but these last couple of games, Tennessee's pitching has done really, really well. And I think it's going to be a big battle in this World Series of, I think offense might come at a little bit of a premium because, like Zach was saying, Texas A&M is really good on the mound, but Tennessee's really hitting their stride on the mound as well. So it's going to be some really good baseball for this 3-game series.
I want to talk to Zach in a second about Texas A&M and some of the injury battles that they've been able to. Well, some of the injuries they've been able to overcome, and they're still performing at a high level. But before we do that, Zayn, or before we do that, Ty, you were mentioning earlier there was your Florida State team gave Tennessee a battle.
Yeah, they pushed it to a game 3, and that game 3 I was hoping that they would pull off the upset, and it was looking like they could maybe do it, but they didn't have enough to pull it off. So I don't know how this final series is going to go if between A&M and Tennessee, if we'll see an upset or not, but you never know.
Yeah, you're right. You just never know. Let's go to Zach. I mentioned I was listening to a podcast earlier today, and they were talking about just how Texas A&M has been able to battle through some injuries. Do you know how is that going to affect them going into this 3-game series, potential 3-game series against Tennessee?
Yeah, I mean, they lost their 2 stars. So Braden Montgomery, the big draft guy, and then one of their big time pitchers, Shane Sadeo, both those guys are done. So they won't be able to play in the College World Series finals this weekend. And then they've had 2 or 3 guys get banged up during this regionals and Omaha so far. But so far, it hasn't stopped them. Like they keep on having these pitchers step up. The whole team is like next man up. They're doing their jobs. So on paper, yeah, it could be rough for them, but the guys that they have behind them have stepped up to the plate, and it hasn't really been an issue for A&M so far.
Yeah, it's surprising how well they've done, and it's a testament to that staff for keeping that team focused. You mentioned Tennessee, they're playing like to every game is important to them. 60 wins. I don't think they probably talk about it in the locker room, right? They're probably going, let's just go out there and just do our jobs. Let's talk real quick. We'll get the predictions in a minute of how all 4 of us think who's going to win. Obviously, I'm rooting for Texas A&M. Obviously, Zane's rooting for Tennessee, and the Dogs are rooting for Tennessee. But let's talk a little bit about the culture, because I know all of us have talked about Omaha in previous podcasts. Zane mentioned what it was like, the atmosphere. But I want to talk about North versus South. We brought this up on a podcast earlier this year when I was with Zane down in I don't know where we were, Florida. No, we were in West Virginia.
West Virginia. Yeah.
Yeah. And we talked about how the northern teams, how there's more parity these days. But I mean, this is an all SEC final, right? So the southern teams are still dominant, mainly 2 conferences that are dominant. So it's down in the South. But I was listening to a different podcast a couple of days ago, and both were women, and they were from the South, and they would not stop talking about it. It was not even it wasn't even a sports podcast. It was something totally different. And they would not stop talking about the College World Series and how they were going to make a decision, and they were going to go down to Omaha or go over to Omaha because they want to be there with their kids and their families. Zach, real quick for you, I mean, you're living down in North Carolina right now, so you understand that, right? The families and generations are getting rally behind their teams.
You mean like fans? Oh yeah, absolutely. Especially like the Southeast doesn't have too many professional teams. Like for baseball, like you really just have the Braves in this huge radius. So a lot of people are really invested in their college sports. And it makes sense because the college athletes, the SEC conference is the power conference for football, they say. ACC is kind of like the basketball conference in general. So down, in the South, Southeast, it's people love their college sports. You'll run into like a good amount of people that do like professional sports, especially here in Charlotte, like Panthers fans, Hornets fans, things like that. But when you get like out into different areas of the country, like Arkansas, no professional teams, places like that in the South, they're obsessed with their college sports for sure.
And you probably noticed it too in your recruiting and just talking to the college coaches around the country.
Yeah, I mean, college baseball is like Zach's saying, the MLB is it's spread out, but it's also cluttered in certain areas, certain regions. So, college baseball is something like, especially in the SEC, right? Like you talk about places like Ole Miss, and people are like, "Oh man, how do they get those atmospheres for a college baseball game?" Well, like at Ole Miss, like Mississippi, there's not much else around. Like same thing for like when you watch softball, right? College softball is a really good example of how communities really rally around their college sports and college athletics. Like you watch those super regionals of softball, those things were packed, bunch of people, great environments, and that's just kind of the way that college sports is going. It's going in a good direction, and I think it's a different direction for sure, with NIL being in the mix now and the transfer portal, and these schools being able to get better and better and better players. I think also makes people more attractive to it as a casual fan.
Let's do our final thoughts on how we got to this point with these two teams, and then also predictions. We'll start with we'll go youngest to oldest. That way, since Zayn had the last comment there, he can start with this one and end with Zach. So, Zayn, what do you any more thoughts about the World Series this year, and who you think is going to win this thing?
No, I mean, I think it's going to be a really good series. Like I said earlier, I think it's going to be, both teams have really good pitching staffs. Like Tennessee's hitting their stride right now on the mound. Texas A&M continues to fight, and has been really good on the mound all year. I think it's going to be, back and forth the entire time. I think, sometimes I wouldn't be surprised if it comes down to just who's home, right? Like these first couple games, and then I would not be surprised if it goes to an if necessary. I think it's a little weird that there's the 2 p.m. game on day 2 on ABC, but I wish they were all night games, because that's kind of going to be, it's tough to play that 7:30 at night, and then you got to turn around the next day and play a day game. So that might be advantage to who loses the first game. I don't know. We'll see. But that's kind of a wrinkle that I don't think really pans out that well for the College World Series. I would personally like to see both teams be able to get full rest and everything, and be able to rejuvenate and play their best for sure in the 3 games of the series. But overall, I think it's going to be a really good matchup and really great baseball, and I think there's going to be a lot of eyes on it.
All right, you're going to say Tennessee, of course, right?
Yep, I'm going with Tennessee with my team, the team that the wheel has spoken to me.
All righty. Let's go to Ty next. Ty, what are you thinking? Any thoughts on the series and who's going to win this thing?
Yeah, so it's really interesting that Zayn pointed out there's a 2 p.m. game in the middle of the series. I didn't realize that. I don't know if that's going to play into factor a favorite for one team or the other. Zayn, real quick before I do my predictions, why do you think they did a day game? Is that something they usually do, or do you think it just has to deal with like TV ratings? Like, are people more likely going to watch on a Sunday afternoon or something?
I imagine it's just a TV scheduling thing, since they want it to be on ABC, because the other game 1's on ESPN, game 3, the if necessary, is on ESPN. So I imagine since they want one of them on ABC, I think it's just a time slot thing, which you want to put the college football playoff in the afternoon because of a time slot. You want to put the Final Four, the March Madness national championship game at midday. So I don't know. It's just, I don't know why. There probably is a for sure reason. My guess is just a time slot thing.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of thinking when you brought it up. Yeah, but I don't know if that will favor one team or the other. But I'll get into my predictions. I think Texas A&M is going to take game 1 and shock everyone. And Tennessee is going to be kind of on their toes game 2, and I think Texas A&M is going to start out with a big lead in game 2, and everyone's going to be freaking out, and then Texas A&M is going to blow game 2. Tennessee will win game 2, and then game 3 is going to be a blowout, and Tennessee is going to destroy them.
Very specific.
I
And I'll
love
play
it.
the field back when I predict it right.
All right. Well, Zach, let's see if you have that much detail in your predictions. Or first, any final thoughts on the series, where we're at with these two teams, and then and your prediction, of course.
Yeah, it's been a fun World Series. Enjoyed a lot of the games and watching all these teams compete at a very high level. I think it's pretty interesting that both teams, Tennessee and A&M, both went 3-0 on their sides of the bracket. That hasn't happened. I think they're saying 2021's the last time that happened, where we get the 2 off days, and then the World Series will start on Saturday with both teams having like the same amount of rest. I know that's been a debate in years past, like when LSU won last year and Ole Miss or Mississippi State won the year before that. They beat teams that had that layoff, because they had one loss, so they had to play that extra game, so they were kind of like more hot. That whole Major League baseball playoff where you don't want the bye kind of situation. So it's interesting that both sides have that same exact layoff, so we won't have to debate over time off and things like that. I'm predicting that Tennessee's going to win. I think it'll be the first time since 1999 Miami Hurricanes #1 overall team won the World Series. I think Tennessee's going to win in 3 games, but I'm definitely going to root for the underdog, Texas A&M. A couple years ago, I think it was last summer, 2023, the Texas A&M pitching coach, Max Weiner, he used to be in the Mariners organization, and he was the Mariners like pitching coordinator for 4 years. And a lot of those guys would just rave about how Max did such an unbelievable job with their pitching program, like George Kirby, Logan Gilbert, Bryce Miller, all those guys coming up, pitching with him in Arkansas, things like that. And then it was last summer. I actually saw Max. I didn't talk to him or anything, but I saw him at the Futures game in Seattle. And then it was like a week later, he took the job to be the pitching coach at Texas A&M for the 2024 season. So I was like, dang, I just saw that guy. He's like our main pitching guy for the Mariners, and now he's gone, going to coach college baseball. But they all wished him the best. But I know a lot of the player personnel were pretty bummed to see him go. But I'll be definitely rooting for him. His first year. Before the Mariners, he was with the Guardians. So this will be his first year, kind of really in that big time D1 pitching coach role. For him to get all the way to the championship, I hope A&M can pull it out for him.
Well, you know what? Before you give your prediction, Zach and I are you're Zach. This happens. This is what happens to the dad all the time, right? Zayn and I, before the podcast started, we're actually talking about Max a little bit, right? Zayn, we were talking about his background and how he's made this incredible leap and brought success to Texas A&M.
Yeah, we're just briefly talking about it, and kind of going over his track record up to this point, and kind of giving him his kudos just before we started the podcast of how he's done so well with the pitchers and bringing that MLB knowledge to Texas A&M and how he's done so well there.
That's funny. I saw him in the bullpen. I was probably like 15 feet away from him. And then it was like a couple days later after All-Star weekend, boom, he leaves the organization.
Crazy.
The Mariners seem to be doing okay though.
But yes, Tennessee in 3 games. That's
kind of what not as elaborate, detailed as Ty's prediction. He had the run leads by the innings and everything. So I think it's going to go 3 games. I really hope it does, and I hope that Texas A&M puts up a fight. And you never know what happens. I mean, in any series, right? I think addressing Zayn's issue about what he brought up, the 2:00 game on a Sunday, as well as you, Zach, is that I think if you got to play 2:00 on a Sunday after a loss, may be tougher, right? You lose that game. If you lose a heartbreaker in game 1 and you've depleted a lot of your pitching, that's going to be tough to recover and come back and win game 2 on a Sunday afternoon. Don't you think, Zach?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, even if you win a heartbreaker, right? You guys are going to be exhausted regardless. So it'll be a dogfight on Sunday to see who can wake up, get ready, and go try to win the whole thing.
All right, guys. Hey, it was good recapping this year's 2024 College Baseball World Series. Thanks again for joining us on the podcast and making this happen. It's always good to see you guys. And I love that we're doing this podcast because I know for sure I'm going to talk to you guys when it's baseball time and time for the podcast. So it's really cool that we're spread
Draft
out.
season. Draft season
draft-
after this weekend.
Draft
Yep,
season right around the
combine's
corner.
going on right now.
Crazy. All right, Ty, while you're there, can you just take us to where we can get more information about the podcast that people want to find out?
Yep, you can follow us on TikTok at Big League Dreaming. We're also on X, formerly known as Twitter, at BLD Pod. That's at BLD POD. Anywhere you listen to your podcast, Big League Dreaming the podcast, and of course on YouTube, Big League Dreaming the podcast. New episodes every single Saturday at 9 a.m. We'll see you next Saturday for another episode.